Seb stared at the stupidly sweet beverage in his hand and grimaced. Just its aroma made his teeth ache. His mouth had gotten progressively drier every time somebody arrived who definitely wasn't his contact. He was tempted to pull his water bottle out of his pack, but it would probably be frowned on in here. Should he buy a bottle instead? If he had to wait much longer, he'd probably give in. How long was he supposed to wait, anyway? He wished the agency had been more forthcoming with details about the meeting, but they'd said with a client this high profile they couldn't release any specifics, not until the client's representative had arrived to conduct Seb to the site where he'd finally meet the child. Or children. The agency hadn't even told him that. He trudged toward the counter that lined the front window, then changed direction at the last moment because the poor woman whose skirt he'd spilled on was involved in some kind of intense conversation on her phone and clearly didn't need a distraction. He didn't want to take up a table. The shop was busier than he'd imagined it would be, and tables should be kept for people who weren't alone. Alone like me. Yeah, that was the thing, wasn't it? But according to his ex, Seb had nobody to blame for his aloneness but himself. Jace had made that opinion crystal clear. He'd objected strongly to Seb's chosen profession, many times, and at increasing decibel levels throughout Seb's training. "I'm a lawyer," Jace had boomed. "You don't have to work at all, let alone this kind of work. What if somebody at the firm finds out? How will it look?" "But I'm good at it, and I enjoy it," Seb had explained time and time again. "It's what I want to do, what I've always wanted to do." "Even when you were a kid yourself?" Jace demanded. Seb had laughed. "Oh, trust me, especially then." "On your head be it, then." Seb had thought that meant Jace would stop arguing with him about it. Instead, it meant that Jace had broken off their 3-year relationship with a "call me if you ever come to your senses." But because he was alone, Seb was free to consider this assignment. He sighed, assuming the assignment ever materialized. What did a representative from a high-end client look like, anyway? He'd thought at first that it might be the woman he'd spilled on, which would be one heck of a first impression to make. Maybe she was even now contacting the agency and expressing her doubts that Seb was up to the job. Heck, if he were in her place, he'd probably do the same. The tall guy in the Henley had seemed like he was waiting for somebody, so Seb had finally approached him and asked point-blank if he was the client's rep. He'd said no, and when he scooped that guy who looked like a K-pop idol into his arms, Seb got the picture. Seb settled on a stool at the opposite end from his spill victim, hooking his feet on the rungs and tucking his bulky backpack between them. His trainers were new for the occasion, and more expensive than he could really afford, which was another reason he was anxious for this job. It paid really freaking well. He wrapped both hands around the cup, glad for the warmth. It was early June in Portland, which meant cool and drizzly, and although he was wearing his North Face anorak, Seb's hands were still cold. They always were when he got nervous. "You here for the job?" growled a low voice in his ear. Seb jolted, nearly spilling the latte, and swirled around on the stool. His eyes widened and he gulped because the enormous man behind him didn't fit Seb's idea of a high-end client rep. For one thing, he looked as though he'd been standing in the rain without an umbrella for half an hour because his curly black hair was soaked, and even the dark skin of his cheeks was dotted with moisture. Didn't rich clients have drivers to cart their minions around? Or at least give said minions their own transportation so they weren't traipsing around in all weathers? Seb put it on his mental list of things to investigate someday but not currently relevant. That list was getting alarmingly long. He'd started it when he was still in middle school and to this date had never removed a single item from it. For another, this man looked really rough. Not as in rough, dangerous, although with that scowl he could definitely qualify in most people's books, but rough as in ill. His lips were dry and chapped, his dark eyes sunken, his really wide shoulders hunched as though he were protecting a pain-shot middle.